Our gospel reading this morning is a short one, but its brevity belies its difficulty in the living. So listen now to the Word of God speaking in you from this reading in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12. The first commandment is this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is like it: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Here ends the reading. Will you pray with me? Holy Oneness, may these words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in your sight and transformative in ours as we enter into deeper relationship with you and one another. Amen. If you Google community building or community building strategies, of the first 2 pages of results, only two hits will be about something other than cultivating a brand image or customer loyalty. Almost a third of the results will be about creating online community, usually for a brand. Now, remember, of course, last week as we discussed for the first time Martin Buber's initial premise: there is no I. I does not exist except in relationship to something or someone else. I am I only in relationship to a thing, an it, or I am I in relationship to another person, a you, whose reality and presence I engage with fully, aware that in so doing I will be transformed. Well, articles on community building are often titled "Build Your Own Community," apparently without any sense of irony at all. We have become so estranged from the I-thou relationships that even the idea of community is twisted into something that is about me. Now, in his work Bowling Alone, sociologist Robert Putnam wrote of the precipitous decline in political and social engagement, saying that financial capital, the wherewithal for mass marketing, has steadily replaced social capital, that is, grassroots citizen networks, as the coin of the realm. Financial capital has replaced grassroots citizen networks as the coin of the realm. Now, when the Reverend Adam Hamilton first preached this series a little more than a decade ago, community relationships were not one of the relationships he chose to preach about. It is a wonderful series, and we're looking at all the different relationships in our lives, but he chose not to look at community. Now, I have added it to our series for 2 reasons. The first is that it is one of the primary relationships that is discussed biblically. It is the second greatest commandment, after all. And the second reason is that in 2020, our community building has, in a very real sense, been given over to brands, corporate and political. In 2020, the groups with the funding capacity to use the latest research on community building are businesses. And when we say community, we are often thinking about the kind created by a cursor on a screen or an app on your phone. So think about this tonight, if you watch the Super Bowl. There are 77 ad slots. They were purchased for over $400 million in total by politicians and companies alike. And they promise everything from solving all of your problems, that's Amazon, to remembering your loved ones for you when your memory starts to fade. That's Google. Now, the Google spot starts with the voiceover of what is clearly an older man saying, "Show me photos of our anniversary." The string music starts to play in the background, and the faded sepia-toned images start to appear on the screen. He chuckles and says, "Remember, she always snorted when she laughed." Okay, I'll remember that, the Google app shows pleasantly. And an image appears of his wife laughing. At the end of the commercial, the assistant says, "These are the things you asked me to remember." And the words scroll down through the screen, "Remember Loretta loved tulips. Remember our favorite movie is Casablanca. Remember Loretta loved scallops. Remember Loretta." By the end, it feels as if your chest is being pierced. It is so sad and so sweet. It's almost enough to make you forget that this man is feeling isolated and alone. And instead of being in relationship with others around him, sharing those memories, sifting through the photo albums, holding his children's hands, he is speaking into a piece of metal and plastic. The very device that allows us to feel as if we can travel further away from our loved ones, leading to fewer physical connections, more isolation, and therefore more of the very loneliness that it says it is trying to prevent. Now, this is not an anti-technology sermon. Technology has afforded us more opportunities for connection than we have ever had. When my grandfather left his home to take his first church, he knew he was going across the country and his parents would not be in relationship with his children, but that is what you had to do. My parents, however, are regularly able to be in touch with my daughter, and their voices and faces are already familiar to her, even though they live thousands of miles away. This is not an anti-technology sermon, but it is a sermon asking us to think about how we choose to use those technologies to either disconnect from or strengthen community. Or whether we, myself included, will simply be happy to pretend that certain technologies connect us while using them to make disconnection more possible. "I'll email you," we say to the person standing right in front of us, substituting the I-it for the I-thou for the sake of, what? Ease? Now, as we discussed last week, on an individual level, the isolation is killing us, often literally. But the effect on communal life is just as strong. I could cite you all of the statistics about the decline in communal organizations and associations, but you know them. Look around. Outside of church's obvious decline, how many of you are a member of the Kiwanis or the Rotary Club? How many of you? Not a one. Now, the Urban Institute has conducted a lot of research on this, and they have found that, by and large, the driving forces behind the sudden development of urban poverty, not poverty in general or the income inequality, but urban poverty, could largely be reduced to two factors: the loss of manufacturing jobs in cities and the loss of community. As politics become more extreme and young white nationalist shootings become increasingly common, we should also think back to Putnam's Bowling Alone, where he warned in the year 2000 that people divorced from community and association are first and foremost amongst the supporters of extremism. People divorced from community are first and foremost among the supporters of extremism. Now, Krista Tippett wrote in her recent book, Becoming Wise, there's a widespread awareness that the healing stories of America's history that we've told ourselves collectively, they are far from complete. There's a bewilderment in the American air, both frustrating and refreshing for its lack of answers. We don't know where to begin to change our relationship with the strangers who are our neighbors, to address the ways in which our well-being may in fact be oblivious to theirs, or even harming theirs. We don't know how to reach out or what to say if we did, but we don't want to live this way. I don't want to live this way, she says. And this, of course, is the good news. We don't want to live this way. Now, Tippett, in her decades-long work with scientists and journalists and faith and community leaders, has identified the current moment in history as a pivotal one. As we take up the task of inventing common life for this century, she writes, we are struggling collectively with divisions that are not new, but are freshly anguishing. Here's what is new: a surfacing of grief. The word love is surfacing as a longing for our common life. But perhaps therein lies our confusion, because I love coffee. I love a good book. I love spending time with my friends. I even love my friends. But each of these loves is a feeling. It is something that is fleeting and mostly about me. The love we are craving in our communal life, the love whose lack washes over us like grief, that is a different sort. As Martin Buber writes, feelings are something we entertain. Feelings dwell in man, but man dwells in love. We dwell in love. Love is the thing that happens when we fully and completely meet. When an I enters fully into an encounter with another thou, love is the space between. It is the force that changes each person in a genuine encounter. In other words, love of the kind that we are craving, the kind in which we abide, that love is God. God is the force between us that changes us and calls us to our best selves. And herein lies one key as to why our connections with our neighbors are faltering. I am not entirely sure we want that type of encounter. Not only does it guarantee that we will be changed, but it implies a responsibility for the other. We cannot use or set aside that which is intimately and powerfully connected to us. We are obligated to it. When we enter into genuine encounter, we take on responsibility for that other person. One of tonight's commercials has the tagline, "It's only worth it if you enjoy it." We don't want to be in relationship because relationship is hard. This is why, of course, many of the scriptures around neighbors and community are about the obligatory nature of being human. In Leviticus, those early codes of conduct, we find obligations to leave grain or grape in your fields for the poor, to care for the blind and the deaf, to pursue justice, and to build others up in the name of neighborliness and love. And after each instruction, it is repeated, "I am the Lord your God." To be in relationship with God is to be responsible to one's neighbors, and vice versa. John Powell, the acclaimed civil rights attorney, reminds us that the United States became extremely attached to the notion of individuality and independence, this hubris that we could control everything, including the world, when we can't even really control ourselves. And he continues saying, sometimes people talk about how we need to do things to connect. We need to do things to connect. But we are connected. What we need to do is become aware of it, to live it, to express it. And he goes on to say, think about segregation. Segregation is a formal way of saying, how do I deny my connection with you in physical space? As the civil rights leader John Lewis phrases it, you have to have this sense of faith that what you're moving toward, this beloved community, is already done. It's already there. You have to live as if you are already there and that you're already in that community, part of that sense of one family, one house. If you visualize it, if you can have faith that it's there, for you it is already there. Now this takes practice. As Tippett prompts Lewis to recall, before any march or sit-in, they followed strict codes of conduct for their interactions. Kindness at all costs, eye contact, no unnecessary words, and dressing up. Before Selma, they spent months with others rehearsing, role-playing, placing themselves in the shoes of the policeman feeling threatened and under orders to gain control. They spent months role-playing the policeman so they could understand. They would discuss that if you have someone attacking you, beating you, spitting on you, you have to think of that person. To be fully human, we have an obligation to the person in front of us, no matter what. Does that sound a bit Christ-like? Because it should. Because again, we are finding in this relationship, our relationship with our neighbors, that vulnerability is a key. To meet your neighbor where they are requires profound vulnerability, as Lewis demonstrated, sometimes even physically. And it also requires a profound faith in the connection between us all. Now, if you ask any community organizer for their 5 basic principles, the first one you will hear is find a common purpose. Find a cause or an interest to meet around. It could be a new park or a love of bowling. Find a commonality and start there if you want to build community. But for the purpose of this series and this moment in time, this conversation, in American civic history, in our lives together, I'd like to go one step back. Start with encounter. Start with putting yourselves in proximity with your neighbors, particularly those with whom you know you disagree. As John Lewis put it, act as if you are already in relationship, because you are, and your avoidance should tell you that. Act as if you are in relationship, and let the only agenda be to listen deeply. That's it. Be fully in the moment with the person, the thou, in front of you. Make relationship the center of your interactions with the world. And I promise, if you make relationship the center of your interactions, the Holy Spirit can take it from there. And if that doesn't scare you, maybe it should. Thanks be to God.